Garrett, how you doing, sir?
Doing well, sir. How are you?
Okay. Thank you for sitting down with me today. We talked about, we're going to do a little bit of an interview, but let's tell people what's your background? Where you been from? Where you raised at? What do you do for a living?
Well, I'm in south of San Antonio, Texas, small town, South Texas guy. Lived here more or less my whole life, with a small amount of travel around Texas, but mainly just, about an hour south of San Antonio. And so I work in a research lab in San Antonio and just commute from the more rural areas into the metropolitan area for work. And that's what I've been doing for the past year or so.
Okay, excellent. Well, since you've been around and I met you, I guess it's been about a year ago. We've talked a little bit about your background, but as far as your religious background, let's talk a little bit about that. How were you raised? What church denomination, if any at all?
Yeah, sure. So my whole life I've been in church from the time I was a small kid. I was raised in a church that was a non-denominational sort of church. I guess affiliated with the EFCA, Evangelical Free Churches of America, and attended that from my childhood all the way through my early 20s. I also got a little bit of exposure to a First Assembly of God church for maybe 4 to 5 years, somewhere in the middle, whenever I was maybe 10 to 13 years old.
Okay, and so you're about what, 32 now?
I'll be 34 in a couple months.
Oh, okay. So you spent your teens and your 20s basically in the Evangelical Free Church of America and sometime in an Assembly of God. So
that's great.
Your background was basically kind of on the edge of a Reformed theology with a mix of dispensationalism thrown in for a good measure.
Correct. I would say that with just, one foot in the charismatic camp for a couple of years as a youth. Not really doctrinally influenced throughout any of my life by the now I can't talk. I was doctrinally not quite so influenced by the charismatics, by the First Assembly of God folks, but I was there for about 4 years as a youth, as a teen, and did get to observe some of what they believe and how they behave, and so. But mostly, yes, that's correct. Spent most of my time with the evangelical Free Church.
And how did you take that? How did that affect you? Did they hold you down and try to make you talk in tongues at the altar, or what?
That's correct. Not that there wasn't any holding down, but there was a strong push to speak in tongues. I never felt quite motivated to do so, but yes, I did. I have seen some speaking in tongues before. It's interesting.
So I take it there was probably a time, I don't know if it was in your 20s, that did you kind of walk away from religion for a while?
Well, yeah. Sometime in my early 20s, I got married to a Mormon. And
well, that's an interesting story.
Right. And I don't necessarily want to get into all of it.
Okay,
but
I understand. That's personal.
It was. I was there for about 4 years and did get to see a good amount of what they believed.
Did you attend an LDS temple?
I didn't. Though I didn't go to the big temple in Utah, but I did attend a Mormon church pretty regularly for about 4 years.
So you had some experience in one of their, whether they call them a stake or what. They don't call them a temple, I guess.
Just a church, right? They call it a Latter-day Saint, the Church of Jesus Christ, Latter-day Saints. I did attend off and on for about 4 years. Yeah.
Well, that had to be a little bit different than an EFCA.
It was very different. I'll say that. I wasn't really trying to join the church, but again, like my exposure to the charismatic church, I got to observe it, but didn't really take a deep root in who I am or my relationship with Father.
Okay, well, the thing is, I know a guy that spent years in it as well. He became a Baptist, and after spending several years in the Southern Baptist Church, sort of moved to a independent charismatic church for a number of years, and then he started reading his Bible, I call it, finally, for a number of years. Very smart guy, but he came to some conclusions of what people would call Messianic Judaism, or Hebrew roots. And so he's walked in that for a long time, well over 20 years. And speaking of that, I understand that you have looked into and you're pursuing interest and an understanding of what people would call Messianic Judaism or Hebrew roots. Kind of talk to me about that, and how did that come about?
Sure. Well, after my marriage ended and I had no more reason to go to a Mormon church, I was looking to get back into a more evangelical, dispensational sort of church, and really couldn't find anywhere I wanted to go. Nothing felt right, nothing fit right, and I took a good break, several years long break from going to church, and didn't really know where to plug myself in, and I traveled for work for a little while, which made it even more difficult.
Yeah, you told me for a while you did truck driving.
Right, so I did truck driving. Before that, I was doing like temporary healthcare assignments, and so I would do 3 months in Oklahoma, and then 3 months in West Texas, and then 6 to 8 months in East Texas, and it made it really hard to find a good home church because by the time I found a church, it was time to move to a different assignment.
Yeah, well, was it one person you met, somebody in your family? How did you get pointed in the direction of what we'll just call Hebrew roots?
Sure, so really trying to strip away all of the teachings that have been placed into my head by different groups, been influenced in a lot of different ways, and I've realized that a lot of it is not scriptural. It's just, you've got founding fathers of one church with their interpretations and ideas, and then you have another religious system that has their own set of doctrines and principles from another set of founding fathers. And
Right.
just trying to sift through my own mind and figure out, well, how much of that do I believe and how much of that do I not believe? And how much of it lines up with Scripture? And sifting through that on my own outside of the church system, having experienced about 3 different church systems,
Yeah.
I thought, well, surely I can find a middle ground or something that looks scriptural and isn't so overwhelmed and saturated with doctrines of men, essentially, and just trying to stick to the text. And in that walk, also, my uncle was a very close friend of mine. He had already been on a path of Hebrew roots or Messianic Judaism for 8 years. At that time, he'd probably been in that walk for 7 to 8 years, I would say. And seeing, after having removed myself largely from the American church system, seeing, most of my family go towards an evangelical leaning, and then on the other hand, seeing my uncle moving more towards a Torah observant lifestyle, I got to kind of see from a distance how both of those look, and see, well, where do I want to land, and how can I reconcile these 2 different movements and belief systems? And so I would say, yeah, that was sort of the catalyst early on for me getting into the Hebrew Roots movement. My uncle did have a lot to do with it, with me being exposed to the Hebrew Roots movement.
So he comes more from traditional Messianic Judaism, and you're sort of looking for something that's a tad bit different, not quite Messianic Judaism. But how long have you been visiting, looking at different congregations that kind of fall into both camps?
Well, I would say I was looking at and observing congregations that fall into both camps for maybe starting about 3 or 4 years ago. Once I started to realize I needed to plug myself back into something, because I can't just be on a spiritual island forever. And so I can't just be on a spiritual island forever. And I didn't want to really land off in no man's land. And, I do need some sort of teaching. I do need some sort of, how do you say, tutelage. There has to be some value to meeting together with a congregation. And so I would say through all that, looking at the 2 of those things, I have been maybe about 3 years, I would say, trying to pinpoint it with a date, maybe about 3 years looking around in the San Antonio area for a group to study Scripture with.
So you landed at a congregation called Sharit Israel Kahal Yehoshua, or the Remnant in Yeshua congregation near Poteet. So
Right.
How's your experience been there so far?
It's been good. Again, my uncle sort of pointed me in that direction just due to geography and their proximity to where I live, and so he helped guide me in that direction, or at least suggest it. And I showed up and didn't really know what to expect because I mean at that point I hadn't really participated in any sort of deep study in that religious system, or maybe that's a poor way to say it, but it's the best I can do with my current vocabulary.
Okay.
So
And so, but you've learned a lot, and you looked at Dr. Michael Heiser's stuff.
sure,
I guess
yeah,
via YouTube while he was still alive, and even since then.
yeah.
And a lot of his teaching even shakes up people in the more traditional church world.
Yeah, I would say while I was unchurched and I was studying on my own without any sort of congregation, Michael Heiser had a lot to do with it. I did read two of his books, The Unseen Realm and Reversing Hormone. Both of those books I think were really well done, and I read them thoroughly, front to back, and he read a lot of the cliff notes and looked at some of the references he makes. He did a really good job presenting all of his ideas, and so yeah, he had a lot to do with me. Not completely losing my faith and helping keep me grounded, because a lot of his work is just taking a really good look at Scripture.
Well, I'm glad to hear that he helped keep you grounded, because there's an attack on him, as there is on the Hebrew roots, from
Right.
elements in the Christian camp.
Right.
And even though I shouldn't say but the point is, his work was beneficial, and a lot of the stuff that he touches on, even certain people in the Hebrew roots won't touch it. Some go to seed on it, but it had a beneficial effect for you.
I think so. He looks at some stuff in Scripture that is uncomfortable for churches to look at in a regular Sunday setting. There's only so much you can cover in a 30-minute, family-friendly sermon with people, with a limited audience. You have to reach everybody, and Heiser gets into some things that are a little uncomfortable for a lot of people, I would say, but I had no fear in seeing the topics that Heiser was drawn to. And so it explains some Scripture that gets glossed over or overall ignored or explained away or dismissed by traditional Christianity. And I think he does a really good job of explaining some difficult passages. And more so than just explaining a passage here or there, he has a sort of worldview and set of rules for interpreting Scripture that really apply well to non-denominational people who just are seeking to read the text. And he in his own words, without putting words in his mouth, he seems to be really good at staying out of any one system and just presenting what the text says and how to read it.
Right.
Which really appealed to a lot to me.
Well, recently, and I'll go back to something else, but recently you sort of had an experience in sort of a home Bible study that was kind of shocking to me. You told me the story about some people attempting to study the Bible, and that's a wonderful thing, but they didn't even try. I mean, wonder how much people can absorb sometimes, and why most people get a 15 to 20 minute sermon on Sundays, an offering and some music, and get to go home. But with all the Bible translations out there, the people that were attempting this sort of fell short in their dedication, I think you were saying.
Yeah, I would agree. I think just largely due to the state of technology, media, and a lot of other factors, I think many people have a very short attention span. And so for that reason, the 20 to 30 minute sermon model works, because a lot of people want to come, be entertained, and then leave. And so whenever people try to meet outside of that or search for something a little deeper, perhaps, I can't speak for everyone, but perhaps a lot of people find themselves ill-equipped to do so because their attention span, they're just not disciplined enough to hold their attention span.
I guess
that
they
long.
couldn't have hung in with Paul, because he preached so long, a guy fell out of a window one night.
Yeah, I guess not. And it's sad to see, because I think there's a lot of beauty, value, and strength in what Scripture has to offer. But the Bible study that I was telling you about was on a Saturday morning. It was on the Sabbath morning.
Well, that was good.
And I thought that was great, yeah, because I really value the Sabbath. And so they met, and they had a group of about 8 to 9 men that met with, they called it a Bible study. That was their label of what they were doing, was Bible study. And we met, and these are men I'm familiar with, and I know all their names. They're not strangers to me. We met in somebody's home, and it was a decent fellowship, but there was no study. No one opened the Bible.
So no one's really leading the focus of the group. That's the
Right,
problem.
right. There were 2 men really out of the 9 that were technically leading, but no one opened a Bible in the hour or 2 that we were there. So it was. I guess I was there for an hour and a half. Yes, but we were there for an hour and a half, and it was supposed to be a Bible study. That's what we called it, and no one opened the Bible. And matter of fact, one of the 2 men that were co-piloting the so-called Bible study said basically, I know we're here for a Bible study, but there's other ways to study the Bible besides just reading the Bible. And he kind of repeated a few rephrasings of that sort of line and in a 2 or 3 minute time span. And it was really curious to me to see someone come to a Bible study and suggest to everyone that we should do anything but study the Bible while we're studying the Bible.
Well, years ago, I had a similar group in another city I lived in where we had a men's Bible study, and I asked a certain question of them, and we had 8 in that group, and only one guy was willing to put in the effort to really give me an answer. And most people, they want to pick on the Roman Catholic Church because they say Roman Catholics don't study their Bible. Well, that's kind of changing. At least I've noticed that even amongst Roman Catholics. But most people want the preacher to tell them what to believe. And if somebody's telling you what to believe, then it's not your faith, it's their faith you're living out. I mean, there's a difference between teaching and explaining Scripture to impart something to somebody, and really everybody starts somewhere. But with all the English translations, I guess we have a goldfish, what I'll call it, goldfish memory problem. There you go. They're past 15 or 20 minutes. But I think you found that Charade, at least, has been radically different than that in their presentation of Scripture.
Yeah, it sure has. It's very different than anything I'd experienced before. It's a small group. It's relatively close knit. My first impression on day 1, within the first 5 minutes, was, geez, these people are happy to see me. It was very welcoming. The feeling initially was different for me as compared to any other church that I've been to. I would say that my experience in the several churches I've been to is that it's hard for a lot of people to accept newcomers, and I think that's not only my own conclusion, but I've met hundreds of people who have said that churches are cold and distant and not welcoming, and not to judge too harshly, but on any one church or any group of churches. But I would say that when I came to Sharia, there was a serious, deep, heartfelt interest from just about everybody to know my name, to know who I am, where I came from, how am I doing, how's my relationship with Father, and just very hands-on. How are you? Just very, very much like discipleship.
How's your walk? Disciple.
Right, absolutely. So I felt very, just from the get-go, discipled, so as a feeling, that was really interesting. Very warm, very welcome. Bring me in, sit me in a chair. Here's something to eat. Here's something to drink. How are you? Just very across the board, welcoming and
well,
warm.
okay, and that's excellent. That's a part of it. What have you learned? What's the 1 or 2 big takeaways maybe that you can think of now? I know you might think of something later.
Sure.
That you've learned while you've been there.
Sure, right. So I mentioned the way that felt initially, and that's all well and good. But aside from the way it felt, really touching the heart of a person and helping them grow towards Father, I think is much more important than an initial first impression. And for me, that first impression really held over and was not a handshake or a smile. It was something that everyone at Sharia really seemed to mean. It was not an act. And they really intentionally sought me and cared about me and just acted out loving me as the way they should. And doctrinally speaking, studying the Bible, I really have appreciated the way that they've just dissected one verse after the next. Sometimes they'll spend 20 minutes on a word, and at times that can be really beneficial to hone in on a word, a grammar usage by the author of a certain book, and really getting into the bones of the text and what makes it work has been really fantastic.
So no one though tried to put upon you some type of Hebrew root stuff you had to believe, or else you were going to hell. What did they?
Oh, certainly not. No, I don't feel like anybody tried to put any sort of belief on me. I would say at Sharit, we are all very, very interested in reading the text and building conclusions from the text, trying to understand the author's original meaning from one book or another, and coming to the conclusion that the author would have us to come to. That was very good. I think approach from Sharit and from the people there, and so I have no issue with the way that they study the text, and it's been great. I don't feel any one belief or any set of beliefs has been pressed upon me. No, to answer your question, no one belief or set of beliefs has been pressed upon me. Matter of fact, I would say there are people at Sharit that don't necessarily align with each other or with me ideologically on every single line item. However, we're all a body of believers who are fervently seeking to grow closer to Father and to lift each other up as we do so.
Well, okay, great. Well, we're going to kind of stop this now, let you take a break, and we'll get back with some more stuff for everybody later.